Welcome to the At Sea podcast. I'm your host, Justin McRoberts. Jon Steingard spent 16 years as a musician, songwriter, and a frontman in a band whose success had its context in what some would call the Christian market. Now, I've spent a bit of time there myself, and there's a whole conversation here about whether or not a marketplace can be Christian. I think it can't. But that's what's significant and odd about that conversation, is that what seems to bind the marketplace together, as well as its buyers, and those who make products for that marketplace, is an agreement of sorts on a very particular set of theological and social conclusions. So when Jon began to question, doubt, and distance himself from many of those theological and social conclusions, it meant having to intentionally begin the work of reinvention. If you're a consumer of religious culture, and specifically the religious culture that Jon took part in, you might know that such a reinvention often comes with what can be a volatile mixture of frustration, disillusionment, respect, clarity, and, well, it can be a lot. So it's not that Jon had undergone or is undergoing a deconstruction that struck me. It's how he did it. He did it publicly and peaceably. He did it humbly. And he did it with a posture much like that I've seen in the best leaders and, well, best pastors I know of. He hosts his own podcast and a show entitled The Wonder and Mystery of Being. He's a thoughtful conversationalist, a really skilled songwriter, and has quickly become a valued friend of mine. This is my conversation with Jon Steingard. Check it out. You're recording in your newish space. You have a new thing going on. Tell me about this thing.
Yeah, so I'm in, I bought a 1969 Airstream trailer.
Of course you did.
And we have some land out front of our house, and we've been trying to figure out what to do with it for years. And so finally we had it graded, and we've got the trailer here, and I'm going to build a deck in a couple of weeks, like out in front of it, and we'll have, like lots of landscaping around it and super green, and just like a cool sort of space this is my office now. So instead of renting an office, I sort of did this, and
you built it
by not renting an office, it'll pay for itself in like a couple of years. And so, and it's cool and it's fun, and so yeah, I'm stoked on it.
Should be. And you are geographically where specific? You're in San Diego-ish.
I'm just north of San Diego. Yeah. So we're in San Diego County. We're in a town called Vista.
Yeah. Okay.
So it's just east of like Carlsbad or Oceanside, if you've been there. Mm-hmm. And Vista, it's funny, like when we bought a house here, it was not a cool place to live necessarily. It was like real.
And then you got there, and then the Airstream happened.
I just got lucky.
Okay.
I just got lucky. Like, there's this little downtown that was sort of just semi-abandoned for years, and nothing was going on down there. And then right around when we bought here, the city council all of a sudden decided to just, I guess they had been working on it for some time, but sort of revitalize it. And so all these restaurants went in, and breweries, and like the downtown's actually kind of awesome now. So,
and
didn't see that
from there, like ish?
No, my wife
where are you
is,
from?
My wife is, I'm Canadian. I'm from Vancouver originally, and then Toronto, the area, kind of more recently. Yeah.
Okay. Do you feel home where you are now, or just do you cross the border and feel like, oh, thank God I'm back? Like,
well, I haven't lived in Canada I lived in the US for 17 years now. So it's definitely home as far as pretty much my entire adult life, has been here. And definitely San Diego. I lived in Nashville for 10 years, and I had so many friends, and you probably have had this experience too, where people have said, oh, when I moved to Nashville, it just felt like home. I'm like, this is my place. These are my people. This is where I'm supposed to be. And I loved Nashville, but I just never felt that way about Nashville. And when I moved to San Diego, we lived in LA for a minute, and just Southern California in general, I was like, oh, this is for me.
You had like a resonance with it. Like you sort of, were there identifiables? Yeah. Like, so when you're in Nashville, and there's so much about Nashville. It's part of what I think happens for Nashville, and for some people LA, but like you move to the industry town or whatever it is. Yeah. And there's so much functionally about it. It's like, oh yeah, this makes sense. And so it feels like home. Were there distinguishables for you? Like you're in Nashville and like something was missing? Was something present that was like, I can't sit here.
It wasn't anything real specific. I just never had, I mean, maybe I'm going by feeling more than sort of intellect, but like my gut never said this is it. Yeah. You know, and you know, early on in my time in Nashville, my wife and I got married. She was from Southern California, and we always knew that when we had kids, we wanted to live near family. Yeah. And so the choices in our minds were always just, you know, Ontario, Canada, or Southern California. And even just strictly on weather, that's not a hard choice. So yeah, I mean, we sort of always, I guess maybe in the back of our minds, we always knew we'd end up back in California. So maybe on some level, I just never got too settled in Nashville.
Yeah. Okay.
But
like you kind of didn't let yourself. It was like, I can be here and I can like it, but I feel like I belong somewhere else.
Yeah, that could be. I definitely, like, I was super entrenched in the Christian music world. So that was my community. Those were my friends. And I definitely had every reason to consider it home, you know, technically. Yeah. But my approach to life in general is that I feel like everything is always temporary. And so, I always assume that wherever I'm at right now and whatever I'm doing right now, that there will be more to that story. Like, I just always assume that.
It's like, be where you're at, grab hold of the stuff in front of you, but hold it loosely and make plans, but don't get shocked.
And my family moved around a lot when I was a kid. I never lived in one house more than 3 years.
Is that like an Amway thing? What happened? What was going on there?
No, my dad's just a pastor.
Okay. Same.
And it's basically Amway.
Same.
No, but you know, we moved around a lot, and I just got used to being in new environments all the time, and so the assumption sort of was built in that, like, wherever you're at, whatever you're doing, like, that's for now, but it's not forever, you know?
Yeah, that's good. And that feels good for you. That feels like you don't feel unsettled in the constant change and in the, hey, this may move. You feel more at home.
And I lived, and I mean, the first few years of Hawk too, like, we played 250, 260 shows a year. And so we just never unpacked. Like, I lived out of a suitcase for, I mean, I probably actually, even once my wife and I got married and we bought a house and stuff like that, I still, like, putting my clothes in a dresser instead of, it's just, I didn't actually do that for probably 15 years.
Yeah, same.
Like, it was like the suitcase was the dresser.
Yeah, I was trying to break that down for something the other day about like airports and hotels and rental cars, and because they were like, you know, how
that's home.
Exactly. And that's the thing. It's like, well, you know, you sleep and comfort. I'm like, I don't know if I can explain this to you, but like, I would joke around about like Southwest Airlines. It's like a family in the sky. But legit, I would like get on like, you know, one of the old DC-9s when I started traveling, DC-10. I was like, like the engines would fire up, the plane would tilt back, like, this is the best sleep I'm going to get all freaking year. I love this. It was just so comfortable, so happy, so at home.
That moment when, like, it's like my body has reactions to being on a plane. It knows exactly what to do. So I sit down and I'm asleep before the plane's even done boarding. As long as I'm in the window seat and I know that I'm not going to have to get up.
Do you have a side, right or left side? Do you need to lean right or lean left on the plane?
I don't have a side. I just prefer a window because I don't want to have to, like, get up for any reason if I don't want to. Yeah.
Settle all the way.
And so, So I just either side window, and I sit down, and the minute I sit down, my eyes start to feel heavy.
That's exactly
they haven't even closed the door yet. And I just close my eyes, and I will tell you, flying on a plane now with a mask is kind of great, because before I would be conscious of the fact that my mouth is probably going to at least partially open. It's going to be really embarrassing.
You're going to be that sleeping guy.
I'm wearing a mask, and I'm like, well, this is brilliant.
It's fantastic. I was, when, you know, it was after the first several years traveling, then I would like travel with family or friends, and we get on the plane, and they're like, they're excited. Like, we're going to get a drink on the plane and have a conversation. I'm like, I'm going to have a nap. And they're like, where are you going? I'm like, I'm done for that.
This is my time.
Yeah, this is me.
This is my time.
That's me.
And I actually was like, I've been a little bit bummed at how activity has gotten so much better on planes, because now, like, I fly Delta. And, you know, I know anyone that travels a lot tends to have like a one airline they pick or whatever. And so for me, that's been Delta for a long time. And Delta started doing, you still have to pay for Wi-Fi, but messaging apps are free.
Yep.
And so you can stay connected the whole flight.
Yep.
If that's available, you're going to do it. Or like, you know, I do most of the time.
We're throwing self-control. We're throwing self-control entirely out the window. It's available to me. Well, therefore,
like, this is how it goes in my mind. In my mind, I'm like, well, if my wife needed to get a hold of me for some reason, it'd be better for that to be an option than not.
Yes,
and it didn't used to be an option. So I'm like, okay, like I'll connect, and like that way, if someone needs to text me, they can text me. But the problem is that before, it used to, like, you know, if you're on a cross-country flight, it's like 3, 4, 5 hours of inaccessibility, and it was like really a gift.
Yes.
And now it's like
they can come get you.
Now if you're unavailable, people can be like, well, why didn't you log on to the free messaging or whatever?
In other words, you still have to have things called boundaries.
You know, maybe it's good that I'm reminded that, you know, I am in control of my own accessibility, and I should create boundaries actively. But it always is nice when they're built in some way, and
yeah. Which actually we're going to come back to in a little bit and talk about like accessibility and boundaries. Well, access, not accessibility, but like access and boundaries and storytelling and family and what have you.
That's a better way to say it. Yep.
Because you've been for 2 decades in a position in which access to you is actually the that's the, what's the word I'm looking for? Like that's the currency. Like, it's not been like,
so it's the product.
Yeah, it's the thing that actually makes a career in the arts go. It's not the record. The record is fine. It's not the song. The song is fine. But both those things are gateways to connection with the artist, and that's the thing in general. So you've been for 2 decades in a place in which access to you has been key in learning to navigate that. You're not traveling as much now, so you're not out and about, but you are spending more time online. Can you talk a little bit about, and without going through the whole kit and caboodle, I have kind of 2 kind of parallel questions here. One is, we missing the road to some degree, like missing travel. Like, you miss travel, and everyone to some degree does because of the COVID thing and all that. But you've shifted positions in terms of like the kind of access you're granting people and the reasons you're granting access to people. Does it feel different now? Like, you're online a lot, you're having a lot of online conversations, you're doing this podcast, you're doing lots of different podcasts. It's more this kind of conversation. It's more sort of talking through. It's less like art centered in the sense of like you have a product kind of thing. Does this season, and we're going to work backwards from here, does this season feel like an extension of life, or does it feel like there was a break and you're reinventing from scratch? Like, tell me about what it feels like to be you right now.
I definitely think it feels more like an extension.
Okay.
I do remember, like, I was, in this band for 16, 17 years. And I remember at various times us telling jokes about how, we'd play shows and like people would be like, oh, that's cool, you're playing a show. But really what they would want is to come through the signing line after and like have a conversation or something like that. Yeah. And so we started to joke around like, we could actually save a lot of money on production if we just did a tour where we didn't even play. And we just like, here, come buy a ticket and come through a signing line and take pictures and let's talk and we'll sign something and get a picture with you. Yeah. Cause it seems like for a lot of people that was like the thing they really wanted. And I'm like, well, why are we even bothering with this concert? Like, well, yeah, let's just spend time together. Yeah. So you've got a really good point about access. And I do think that for a lot of musicians, especially musicians that are on the way up, it's like if you're Justin Bieber, then access has a totally different. How you deal with access has a totally different connotation. But but if you're, like for us, like we'd have, over the years, anywhere from, a few hundred to a couple thousand people at our shows. And so it's a little bit more manageable to say meet, 200 people in a night than. And so, now having conversations primarily with people online, and what I'm sort of diving into is a lot more sort of theology and philosophy and ideas about what's true about our faith and how do we know what's true and sort of looking at the history of some of these things. The tone of the conversation has changed because it's just a little bit more of a it's less of a surface level sort of like let's say these things that we all agree on and say them plainly in a way that we can reach as many people as possible. And now I'm finding I'm having conversations that are much more pointed where it's like, okay, these aren't for everyone, these conversations, and that's okay. But for the people that really need these conversations, there's not as many of them out there. It's harder to find spaces where we can have conversations where someone can say, for instance, like I was raised as a Christian, but I'm really struggling to believe that it's true, or I'm struggling, for all kinds of different reasons. And that's a conversation that's harder to have. Yeah.
It strikes me to some degree that part of the difference between like your previous season and what you were doing with Hawk Nelson and with music versus what you're doing now, it's kind of, there's a little bit of a control shift that with music, specifically with pop, right? You put a thing on the table and you kind of have to let go of it because someone will come to you with like, this song hits me here. It means this, and this for me. And then they'll like, sometimes if it's a religious setting, which in your case it oftentimes was, they would like tag it with some other shit like, and God said this to me in the direction of, and you're like, and you just have to receive that. Like, yes, you put something on the table and they get to use it how they want to, read it how they want to, say what they want to about it. And your job at that point is to never be like, well, you're wrong about that song. And it's more like, like, wow, I'm glad that meets you. Whereas now you're more in a place of control of saying, look, this is the conversation that I'm wanting to have. Here are my boundaries for this conversation. Here are the parameters for this conversation. And this is where we're going to head with it. There's a little bit more of like you don't get to do with what's in my head what you want anymore. Yeah.
Well, the goal is different. So for 17 years in the band, I remember there being things. I remember feeling like the right thing to do was to let people believe what they wanted to believe about me. Most of the time. So an example is I have always thought, my entire adult life, I've always thought that it's perfectly moral to have a beer. I don't see any moral problem with it. Even as a Bible-believing Christian, I read the Gospel of John and I go, oh, Jesus turned water into wine. So clearly alcohol is not like inherently bad.
Right.
So I've always held that view. But in the evangelical church in America, especially when we were getting started, that was not a widely held view.
Right. It was at least questionable.
Yeah, it's like maybe it wasn't immoral, but like, why would a good Christian even want to drink is sort of the approach. And
this shouldn't be a question.
So plenty of people, right. So plenty of people just assumed that like, oh, I think drinking is bad. And so certainly Hawk Nelson and, John thinks that drinking is bad. And I would do nothing to dissuade them from that because I would never say it. I would never lie about it, but I would allow them to have an impression that was not correct.
Good.
And that always bothered me. It always bothered me. And when we'd have conversations about it internally, sometimes people, whether it was management or whatever, would say, look, like, why do you want to have that fight? Right? Like, what's the point? The goal is to reach as many people as possible with music. And so if you start talking about things that are divisive, you're going to turn some people off. So why even do that? if the goal is to reach as many people as possible with your music, and built into that goal is sort of a financial incentive, right? Like we want to sell as many records as possible. We want to be as successful.
Then there's some
as we can.
wisdom in that advice.
Then it's like, okay, well, like, yeah, I mean, there's no reason to piss people off unnecessarily. But for me, just internally, I was always like, that's something about that bugs me, because it feels deceptive. And so that's something I don't do at all anymore. Like I very much pay attention to, okay, if I feel something, if I'm pretty certain, like if I'm unsure, then I'll decline to comment on something. But if I have a really strong point of view on something, I'm fine talking about it publicly. Yeah. And I take notice of any time where I hesitate to say what I think. I'm like, oh, why am I hesitating? Am I pandering? Am I hesitant? Is it because I'm uncertain, or is it because I'm worried about the consequences of being honest?
Right.
And
that's
if it's
really
the
good.
Second one, then it should give me pause. Yeah.
That's really good. Side note, when you're talking about a tour that was just signing autographs at a table, it hit me. I was like, that would actually be brilliant in so many ways. It was like, it's straight like Andy Kaufman level, like we're going on tour, but there is no music, and then just see how that goes. Let's just find out. We're going to go post up at a table and sign autographs. And what hits me is actually funny about that is that it would actually work for some people. They could actually sell tickets to that, and it would go just fine, which says something really odd.
I'm convinced there was a period of time in our career where it absolutely would have worked, because
it's so amazing.
Because, well, I mean, I think early on in our career, I think at the very beginning of our career and at the very end, our music was actually meaningful to the people that listened to it, like the music itself. But there was a period in the middle where we didn't know who we were.
Yeah.
And the pop punk thing had faded, but we hadn't sort of gone all in on pop music yet. And we stylistically and content wise, we were just sort of, we're floundering. At least this is just my opinion. And during that time, whenever we played shows, I always got the sense that it wasn't so much that the people that were meeting us at our shows wanted to hear our music or really valued our music. It was that they valued that we existed. So it was like, you were symbolic. It was parents. Yeah, it was parents that were like, well, I'm glad that there's a band out there that sounds like Blink-182 but isn't Blink-182. Yeah. Like I'm glad I as a parent have the ability to give my kids a Hawk Nelson CD so that they won't hopefully listen to Blink-182 or Good Charlotte or something like that. Yeah. And
well, they probably shouldn't listen to Good Charlotte anyways, but that's a whole other
sure. Right. But I remember noticing, I'm starting to feel like people aren't really fans of the music we're making right now. They're glad that we exist.
Yeah, that's good.
And so in that sense, it's like, it would absolutely work to not play music, because I don't think that's what they're after anyways.
So let's go back to that season to some degree, because when part of why I was asking you about, do you feel like this is like an extension or a continuation?
Sure.
This isn't the first time you've, I don't even want to call it reinvented. It's like, there's a shift. Like this season, here we are in the beginning of November 2020. And, since March, you and I and freaking everyone and their mother has had to some degree reinvent. And the conversation for a lot of folks is really trying, because I think they don't. A lot of people are still in the position where you get the job, you hold it as hard as you can, and you write it until you can get to retirement, and then you're done. But for a lot of us, that's not the case. It's like, no, every 2 or 3 years, maybe sometimes every year, depending on what's going on seasonally, like I've had to reinvent. Like the seasons have changed, the winds have changed, stuff kind of moved around. Yeah. And like, even with just the one band, there were several transitions, several kind of like turns, left turns, mostly left turns in terms of like, this is what we're doing. This is what we're doing. And having to like, try to communicate. Can you talk a little bit about, like initially, like you weren't the front man of the band, you came in and the band had to change.
Right.
And then over the course of time, there were kind of the two other transitions. And the one was like kind of more towards trend. But then there was I think I'm getting this right. Like there was more towards trend, like pop punk is really working. We don't want to do so much the aggressive stuff. And then there was this like, no, let's just do pop because it's actually our strength thing. Can you talk about like that decision making internally, the external pressures, those conversations? Like, what's it look like to actually reinvent when money's on the table and reputation's in play? How's that go?
Yeah. So, I mean, the first thing I'll say is that when you say money's on the table, sometimes people get the idea that it's like fortune making is on the table, and anyone who's done music on on the levels that you and I have done it, we know that that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about
rent is on the table. I hope is what I mean.
Yes. We're talking about the ability to literally feed your family. So I always want to start there.
Yes.
But yeah, so at the beginning, I wasn't a part of the band when it was first formed in like 2002, 2003. Mm-hmm. And the first record came out in 2004. It was an album called Letters to the President. And I wasn't a part of making that album, but right as it was coming out, the guitar player ended up leaving and I came in to replace him. So I joined as the guitar player right as the first record was coming out. So not exactly the beginning, but functionally pretty close. Mm-hmm. And I was the guitar player until 2012. And during that season, we went from, very straight up pop punk to, seeing that style of music sort of wane and trying to figure out what does it look like for a band like us to mature. And internally within the band, we didn't all have the same answer to that question. I'm not even sure we all agreed on the question. But
does that cause, and in that moment, I mean, this is a kind of important pivot here. It's like, is there mostly tension? Is there conflict? Is it like, hey, we'll work this out? Like, how's that like? Yeah.
I mean, on a personal level, we always loved each other. Like we didn't have, like some bands legitimately, like whether people know it or not, like some bands that the members in the band legitimately hate each other.
Yes.
Like actually can't stand each other, don't talk to each other unless they're on stage. And like, that's a real thing. And it's very common.
They're like on a work project together, and that's the size of the thing.
Yeah. We were never that. Like off stage, we always got along great. Mm-hmm. It was always it's almost reversed in a way where it's like, on a personal level, we were always good, but when it came to making guiding decisions on the band, there was an increasing amount of conflict as time went on, and eventually that led to our singer Jason leaving, and it also it coincided with the fulfillment of our first record deal, where that deal was done and complete, so we were now free of any record contracts, and so we could kind of go like, hey, what do we want? And for Jason, that was, hey, I want to try and do this thing on my own. Yeah. And so he left, and we were like, well, I guess that's that. and
there wasn't like a burning in your heart where you're like, I'm supposed to be the front man of this band and I'm waiting for my shot.
No, not for me at all. No. Because I had a very narrow view of what Hawk Nelson was and could be.
Interesting.
And it took outside input for that to be challenged for me.
Did you seek that outside input, or did people come in from outside and say, hey, this is what we think?
No. So we were on tour with Mercy Me, a band you and I are both familiar with. And Bart, the singer, he pulled me into his dressing room one day, and somehow he had gotten a hold of this like album that I had put out on my own independently, like under the radar years before. And I wasn't doing anything with it. I wasn't pursuing a solo career. I had just wanted an outlet. And so I made some music and I put it out. And he was listening to it in his dressing room, and he's like, can you explain to me why you're not going to be the new singer of Hawk Nelson?
Well, that's strong.
And I was like, yeah, because I'm not that guy. Like, I can't front a pop punk band. That's so not me. That's not my personality. That's not my voice. Jason, for any of the things that I disagreed with him on, like he embodied the pop punk persona really well.
He was a hell of a frontman.
And I just knew I couldn't do that. And so that was my response to Bart. And Bart said, well, why don't you give yourself permission to interpret the band in a whole new way.
That's really good.
And I came out of that conversation and I'm like, well, that's interesting. So I went back and I talked to Daniel and Justin, who are the other two members of the band at the time, once Jason was out of the picture. And I knew, I'm like, okay, I'm going to tell them what Bart told me. And I'm going to know on their face, I'm going to be able to tell their instant reaction to whether they believe this is possible or not, regardless of whether they like want to be nice to me or anything like that. I'll be able to read it on their face what they really think.
That's fantastic.
And so I said to them, like, hey, this is Bart's idea. He thinks that we should reinvent the band and allow ourselves to pursue a whole new sound. And he thinks that I should be the singer in that. And they both went, huh.
That's so good.
Huh. And they both sort of like, okay. Yeah. And I was like, okay, we got a chance at this. And so we did that. And we I went headlong into songwriting, and that kicked off about a 6-year period of me writing, probably, 300 or 400 songs. Yeah. And on that album, I think we wrote probably 80. And tried to get our feet under us as a band, what do we sound like now? What are our core principles, and what are our goals? What's our mission statement? And what are our influences that we can agree on? Yes. And so for me, that was about a 2-year process of learning how to be a frontman. And I approached it like study, like I watched other bands. Yeah. I was like, okay, so he's connecting with the audience because he's doing this. That's very good. That's something that I can implement. Yeah. And so it was a learning process for me of going like, okay, how can I learn this new skill? And over the following years on a songwriting level and a frontman level, I just felt myself growing into being comfortable with that role. Yeah. And it wasn't until a couple years later when we released this album called Diamonds, where that seemed to come to fruition. And we had multiple songs that were really succeeding at Christian radio in ways we'd never experienced before. And we were seeing the sort of revolution in the band. And you're right. It was very stylistically a lot pop oriented, because that felt a lot more appropriate for my voice and stuff like that.
See, what I love about the story is it's not really a story, it's both, and you can tell a story about it. But what I love about the process is that a future is generally forged by will and work. Like, it's not as if like, even with something like, not even with, like, there's this odd mythos about life in general, but like the arts or creativity or entrepreneurship or any of this stuff, that like there is a future that you go out and you discover, and there's a pathway and et cetera. I'm like, no, there's not. You have a freaking machete and you have to hack through. That's it. Yeah. Like, and you pick and choose, and by not choosing, you choose that whole thing. So this whole notion of like conversation that you have with someone who's a successful artist, you and I both know, like, there are cats who've had those conversations and not given a rat's ass and walked out and done nothing with it. It's like literally, it's always like, okay, here's the thing, here's a set of circumstances, an inspiration or a challenge you've been handed. And then, so what does tomorrow look like now? And it's always a decision we get to make. Literally, it's always like a choice. So you saying, again, there's the obstacle. I don't really know how to be a frontman. I can write songs. They're going to be different. So I can do that. They'll be weird. I don't really do the frontman thing. So I'm going to study how to be a frontman. Yeah. And that it's not like, okay, tomorrow. It's 6 years. It's work. It's slogging and missing and questioning. And like, that's actually what a future
videos. Yeah. When I go back and watch videos from that first year of shows, I was not good. I continued to play guitar because it was a helpful sort of like a barrier between me and the audience. And I hid behind it, certainly. vocally, I just wasn't very strong. You could see me in like a 45-minute set. You could see me losing steam, like after song 3, you know. In between songs, I would be awkward and wasn't sure how to communicate with the audience and connect with them. Like, you could see all of those classic inexperienced frontman things, and then you watch. And then I go back and watch, like, my favorite show I think we ever did with me as the singer was this festival in the Netherlands called EO. And I saved the video of that because I knew it would be a career highlight. It was in the round. It was like 40,000 people in a soccer stadium in the Netherlands.
Oh gosh.
And they do the production up like you feel like you're Coldplay. It's like there's a stage in the middle, and then there's a pit all the way around the stage, and then there's a thrust, like a catwalk all the way around.
Oh my gosh!
So it's like a ring.
Who doesn't want to play that game?
There's 4. Yeah, dude, it was amazing, and it was one of those shows. It happens so rarely, and I'm sure you've experienced this too. Like, most shows are fine, and like they're good enough, and like some things go wrong and not perfect, but like
some peak moments, and it's neat.
Yeah, it's fine. But every once in a while you get a show where literally everything goes exactly perfectly, and that was one of those for us. And so I watched the video of this, and I'm like, damn, we were good. And like if I watched this band and I watched this frontman, I'd feel like it was compelling. And that blew my mind, because years previous, I never would have imagined myself able to do that.
Yeah.
And so it's sort of, the lesson for me has been like, and this is what I always try to tell people in this story, is like, you have no idea what you're capable of. Nope. You don't. Nope. I didn't. And it took someone else to like help. Well, not just one person, but it took many people actually to help draw that out of me.
Yes.
So in a way I can take credit for it, in that I did work hard at it, but in a way I can't, because I would never have been able to get there without all the people along the way that helped to draw that out of me.
Yeah, that's good.
And it's really encouraging for the future, for all of us to go like, man, we don't know. We don't know if we put ourselves in the right situation and we're willing to work hard and listen and study and be open. We just don't know what's possible.
One of the elements I want to get into is there's a different relationship between artists and audience depending on your genre, right? Like, the responsibility you have as a punk band is really different than the relationship and the responsibility you have as a pop band. But you nonetheless have a responsibility to some. I'm using the word responsibility somewhat intentionally here. Like, there's a relationship, but also like there's this leadership component that comes with being a frontman, being a lyricist, with being a songwriter. You are. We kind of touched on a little bit earlier. You don't need. There's a way in which I tell artists this all the time. Like, you don't really get the choice. Like, you are taking people places. You can either own that or not. But like, folks will move, change, think, and live differently because of things you do and say. So you can own that or not.
Good point. Yeah.
So part of you navigating, genre switches and what have you, also has to do with navigating your relationship with the people who are paying attention and the responsibility you have to them. Can you give me like a minute or two on the oddity of being an artist in a religious space?
Yeah.
And the responsibility that, like, I'm going to overstate this to some degree, and then you can walk it back. No one actually tells you how responsible you are. You just get put on the stage, and it's sell records. But then, like, all the responsibility stuff is like underhanded, and it's negative, and it's just don't blow it. It's not like, hey, here's how to do this. Here's how to shepherd a group of people from the stage behind a microphone. It's, hey, you're out there, write your lyrics. Here's your boundaries. Don't blow it. That's the leadership training for like frontman of religious rock groups. But you've always had a little bit of a sense of like, I mean, you and I
don't think that's an overstatement in the slightest.
No, I don't either. So, but like, in conversations you and I have had, like, you've always had a little bit of a sense of like, I actually know that there's a thing here that like I'm responsible to, and you've been navigating on for a long time. start with just that, and then we'll talk about like this season
Sure.
of life and how that responsibility shifts and how you
Sure.
fulfill it. What's it like to live in that place? Like, how do you fulfill that role? Is that like, how do you not drink yourself to sleep every night? Give me some of that.
Well, sometimes I do.
That's what I'm saying.
But yeah, So my career path is sort of interesting in the sense that it had two distinct periods. One where I wasn't front and center. I was the guitar player. So I was in a supportive role, and I mostly got to observe a lot because whether it's fair or unfair, more expectation is placed on the frontman than the rest of the band. Oh, yeah. You know, like, and in a religious, so like, and in a that's a very, very good comparison because that's true.
That's American football. So the way we do it down here. Oh, never mind. Okay.
Well, you know, in Canada, we have the Canadian Football League, and there's a few rule differences, but the biggest difference is that no one watches.
It's actually true.
So for me, like the first 8 years of our career, like I was observing, and one of the things I observed was that if you are in a band, and specifically the frontman of a band in Christian music or like a religious setting of some kind, without knowing it, you've signed up to be kind of a pastor.
Yes.
And you can accept that role or not, but there are going to be a lot of situations in which that is what's expected of you.
Yeah.
So by the time I became the singer of Hawk Nelson, I had already recognized that, and I knew that becoming the singer, that was part of the deal. Like I knew it going into it. So that's one thing I didn't need an education on. I was like, oh, I get it. That's how it is. And so when I stepped into that role, I was aware, like, okay, I'm becoming the singer, I'm becoming the frontman, I'm becoming this main songwriter, and I also am responsible for sort of leading people. And I took it really seriously. I was like, you know, when you get into those situations, most artists, especially if you start young, if you start in Christian music, you don't know that there's an expectation that you're going to basically be a preacher. Yeah. I mean, there's not a lot of knowledge, and there's not always a lot of coaching on that either. It's like, go out there, you know, say something meaningful. And I took that really seriously, and actually I started reading a lot more about theology in that season of becoming the singer than I had ever read before, and dove into various thinkers. There's some Christian thinkers that I really respect. I still do. That I started just getting into their thought a lot more. And actually for me, that ended up being the beginning of actually a journey out of faith.
Was that because of was that like a
really ironic?
Like, well, to some degree, but like, is it like, I don't like the role, I don't like the machinery, or is it like, I don't like what I'm discovering in the underbelly of this? Like, I'm having to communicate things that I don't actually buy in order to do the job.
Well, it's a combination of all of those things. I think definitely there were things that I had gut feelings about that the Christian culture I was embedded in was not okay with.
Right.
So for an example, like when I watched the Supreme Court legalize same-sex marriage, in my heart I was like, that feels like progress. Yeah. That feels like something that's worth celebrating. Right. And
but you can't do that on mic and lead people in the direction your heart is going.
No. And I remember thinking, wow, I can't say that publicly because of my career. And then I watched Dan Hazeltine of Jars of Clay tweet his support about it right as he was getting on a plane from Australia to America.
Which was amazing. It was the worst timing, bro.
And he had no idea that while he was over the ocean, his career was ending.
Yes.
And by the time he landed in LA and checked his phone, he basically, I mean, it's a little bit of an exaggeration to say that ended their career, but
well, it did. I mean, they had to become
not a total exaggeration.
No, it's not. I mean, they had to become a completely different thing. And they had again, talk about reinvention. Like, you're not going to book 200 church shows. Nope. You're going to you'll do what they've done, which is like, you got to make your own pathway. You do online shows. You're going to do, travel. You're going to, like, your friendships get, tighter and smaller. They're not the band they were before that.
Right. Exactly. So I definitely like, I see all of those things, and I do think that, there's some people that get into Christian music specifically because they want to have a ministry.
Yeah.
So those people are actually like not only recognizing the pastoral element, but they're actually emphasizing it, going like, that's actually why I'm here.
Yeah.
But for bands like Hawk Nelson, that was not how we got into it.
Yeah.
And so it became something we sort of adopted over time.
Yeah.
And in a very odd way, even though I don't consider myself a Christian anymore. Mm-hmm. And we can get into that whole, bag of cats, too. But bag of cats, is that a thing people
I'm fine
say?
with it. I'm not a cat person, so that's fine. It doesn't bother me.
Okay. PETA is going to come after us here. But I actually still sort of value the sort of pastoral element, because
yes.
One of the things I really loved about the career that we had in music is the number of times I got to participate in a meaningful moment in people's lives. Like, okay, I bet you've had this experience too. So you're playing a show, you go and you play a song that is, of all the songs you have, this one is maybe the most likely for people to have heard. So you're playing the one that's like, if people have heard of any of my songs, it's probably this one.
This is the one. Yeah.
So you play that song, and then you look out while you're singing it, and you see two people standing next to each other or sitting next to each other, and that you see them look at each other, and you see this knowing, this sort of like this look where they're not exchanging any words, but they're looking at each other, and they go, they're saying with their faces, this is the one that meant so much to us, or like they're sharing this moment of like they know that there's been, like, I can tell there's been some significance in their life, that all they have to do is look at each other.
Yep.
And I have no idea what that story is. I don't know what's going on there, but I know
you're
it's
part of it.
meaningful.
Yeah.
And somehow I got to be a part of that. And like, if that is something that's positive in their life, like, what a beautiful thing. And I'm straight up addicted to that.
Yes.
Like, I am addicted to that.
Yes. The shift to some degree now, that's a question I think I might as well ask. Would you consider yourself even now kind of a religious leader? Like, are you a religious figure?
Depends what you mean by religious. And
I'm asking you. Like, I'm asking you.
Yeah.
But like the world of conversations you're having, I do want to land here, like, and spend the last segment talking about this is what you're doing with your time.
Yeah.
The conversations you're not, that's how I want to say this. You are not falling into conversations where people are like pulling you into things. You are forging conversations. You're literally setting things out and saying, we're going to engage in this. Yeah. So there's like, you're hyper intentional about the thing. There's no victimization here. You're never like, oh my gosh, this is so difficult for me. No one talked to me. You didn't do that thing. You're like, hey, this is where I'm at. This is what's going on. And we're going to process this out loud together. We're going to do this.
Yeah. Most
of the conversation has to do with not even like doctrine, although there's doctrine, not just theology, there's theology, but also politics and the way we live together and philosophy and the why we do things and psychology, like how do our wounds, like there is this kind of big religious like cultural space that you are like taking responsibility for online. So I guess the two questions, like, if you're not a religious leader, maybe you are. What are you now? Like, what is this title? Like, what is the thing? How do you describe yourself? Because you're
That's a good question.
I know. Because it's like religious leader, pastor. Is there a way in which you can pastor without like being like, without aligning yourself with a particular theology? I mean, is there a way in which you're still really pastoring people? I mean, what the hell are you doing, John? This is what I'm at. What the hell are you doing? And what do you call it? I
don't know. I have struggled for the last, so for your audience, just the sort of super short version is basically like earlier this year, I went on Instagram and I wrote a post saying that I no longer believe in God. And that was the culmination of a process that had been several years of just wrestling with my beliefs and trying to make sense of it all, and studying and reading and learning and listening to different opinions and voices on the subject. And then coming back to what we said really like near the beginning of this conversation is this desire for transparency was huge for me. Yeah. And I was just like, I talked about faith openly for my entire adult life. And now I'm finding that I'm not sure that God is real. And I would call myself agnostic on it. I'm like, he could be. I just don't have an active belief. Like, yes, I believe that God is there. Yeah. And I reached that point, and I felt like I had to be honest about it. And so I wrote this post in May, and I basically laid out how, in a short version of like how I got there and what I was thinking and what were the reasons that I found myself not able to believe. And on one hand, I sort of thought like, oh, this is going to be great. I can just be honest, and then I can wash my hands of this, and I can just go on with my life. But I discovered that I wasn't done with my curiosity about spirituality. I wasn't done with wondering what might be true about God and our beliefs and my own heritage, both as a Westerner who like. The Western culture is just so heavily influenced by Judeo-Christian, thought and values, and my own upbringing is so Christian. Like it's not really possible for me to extricate myself out of that, and so I find myself continually curious about this gray area in between belief and unbelief, and so I've been sort of exploring that space for the last 6 months. And one of the most amazing things I've discovered is I'm far from the only one. Yeah. There's so many people out there and I specifically empathize with people that grew up in church because that's my background. Yeah. That are struggling with Christian beliefs and going like, I just don't know if I can believe this. Yeah. And I don't have a dog in the fight as far as like whether you end up believing it or not. Yeah. What I want is for people to be able to walk out those questions in a healthy way and have a space to do it. And traditionally, my experience with Christian culture is that space is hard to find. Yes. And if I can be a part of helping create a little pocket of acceptability, an area where it's acceptable to ask questions that could get you in trouble, elsewhere, then I want to do that. And I'm finding that my sort of core value in that whole journey is I really love and care about people. And I want to see people living in the healthiest way possible and with the least amount of sort of dogma and fear and the feeling of restriction, like they're stuck. I don't know. Like I see this connection. I've wrestled with depression over the years, and I've noticed a correlation between feeling stuck and feeling depressed. Yes, it's like there's something about depression that you feel stuck, and if I can say something or have a conversation with someone that can help somebody get unstuck, then that's a more hopeful thing. Right there, like you're already in a more hopeful space, regardless of whether that takes you into a place of more faith or less. You know what I mean? Yeah. Yeah, I love that. I like what you're up to. And we talked way at the very beginning about your you called me and you were really encouraging. Yeah, and mostly because I knew you were going to get throat punched by folks who were going to try to throat punch you, but I also knew like there was this. You were not doing the thing that. It wasn't just a matter of self-expression. Even your posture in presenting your place, like it wasn't a matter of like, here's where I'm at, deal with it.
It was a matter of
Right.
like, I need to be responsible to this. It's what you said a minute ago. Like, I've been public about faith in this way for the whole of my life and benefited from it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Like, what a shitty thing to be like, yeah, I'm out and I'm not going to talk about it anymore. Like, no, be responsible to that.
Yeah.
Like, it's one of my favorite pieces of advice about religious communication. Jean Luen Yang was like literally the very first guest ever on the podcast. Talked about a conversation he had with a professor in college who was a Buddhist. And he was wrestling with writing about his faith. He's like, I don't know, he's a graphic novelist. He's talking about writing about his faith.
Oh, wow.
And he goes to her and he's having this conversation about writing about his faith. And she says to him, Gene, I don't want you to write about your faith. And at first he's like, oh, here we go. Like, here's the thing. She goes, no, you should write about your life. And if your faith is real, then it'll just show up. And like, that's the thing that you did, I'll just use some religious terminology here. The witness that you bear and doing it the way you do is like, this is actually my life. And here's what faith looks like. Here's what religion looks like. Here's what thought looks like. You're being faithful. I think that's just better leadership than trying to be beholden to a particular ideology for the sake of the strengthening of the ideology. Because if I'm bolstering the ideology, I'm always going to cost someone's health every single time. But if it's about people, then it's a person, me, I'm bearing witness to what's happening in me. And I think that's always better leadership. I think that's always better help for folks is like, what's it look like in a human life? And I like the way you're going about it. And so thanks for pointing off at me, man.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I still have moments, like I have seasons where I'll go for a couple weeks and not post very much online because I'll feel like I'm working through a particular issue. Like whether it's theology or like just my perspective on a certain topic, I'm like, ooh, if I'm unsure about this, I kind of want to be quiet for a minute.
Yes.
Which
is smart.
So I find myself in those periods occasionally. I'm kind of in one right now. I sort of, you and I talked when this first all went down, and we like the topic of a book came up, and I was like, for a long time, I was like, I think I love writing, and so I've had the desire to write a book, but I was like, I'm in the middle of the thing that I would be writing about,
yes,
and so I don't know that it's the right time to write it.
Nope. You live it first.
And then about 3 weeks ago, it's sort of just, I woke up one day and I was like, it's time.
Yeah.
And so I started and I'm about halfway done.
Good,
It's
man.
just been one of those things where it's like, and it's an obsessive thing. Like I'm getting up at 4 a.m. and writing for 3 hours and then going about my day. And so I have it in my mind that like, I might just write it for myself. I have no idea. Yeah. I'm just noticing that my thoughts are becoming more coherent as I do it.
That's perfect.
And so I'm like, okay, I'm making sense of this for myself. And when I finish, I'll know whether it's something that was just for me or whether it's something worth sharing. I'll know when I'm done.
Yes.
And it could go either way. And you've given me good guidance on that kind of thing.
I'll do what I can.
Yeah.
Well, dude, thank you so much for your time. This was great. Appreciate it. Seriously.
Yeah, dude. It's awesome. Thanks so much.
And thank you for listening to this episode of the At Sea Podcast. If you would like to follow up with Jon Steingard, his last name is spelled Steingard, Steingard. First name John without the H. His show is available at Apple Podcasts and Spotify and is also available at YouTube/Jon Steingard. If you would like to be part of what we're doing here with the At Sea Podcast, you can visit us at patreon.com/Justin McRoberts and join us by selecting one of the support tiers. We would love to have you on the team. Until next time.